Life, according to Schopenhauer, is filled with struggle, pain, and endless desire. Yet, hidden within his dark philosophy lies a surprising light, compassion. For Schopenhauer, compassion is not just kindness, it is the very foundation of morality and the only true way to reduce suffering. When we feel another's pain as if it were our own, we step beyond ego, beyond isolation, and discover a shared humanity. In today's world of competition, division, and loneliness, his message rings louder than ever: compassion is not weakness, it is our deepest strength, and perhaps the only path to meaning. Schopenhauer begins his philosophy of compassion by recognizing the fundamental reality of suffering. In his view, existence is shaped by the restless striving of the will to live, which traps all beings in endless cycles of desire and frustration. Because of this, life inevitably contains pain, physical, emotional, and psychological. But unlike many philosophers who focused on rational duty or abstract ethics, Schopenhauer turned his attention to the immediate, lived experience of suffering. He argued that the root of morality is not logic or law, but the direct recognition of another's pain. When we see someone suffering and feel compelled to help, we are experiencing what Schopenhauer calls mightily compassion. This moment is powerful because it dissolves the boundary between self and other. In compassion, I no longer see your pain as separate from mine, I experience it as if it were my own. This identification breaks the illusion of individual isolation and reveals the deep interconnectedness of all life. For Schopenhauer, compassion is the only true foundation of morality. Laws, rules, and duties can be manipulated, but the authentic urge to relieve suffering cannot be faked. It emerges spontaneously, without calculation, and unites human beings beyond selfish motives. This insight challenged the cold rationalism of his time and continues to challenge today's world, where self-interest often dominates moral discussion. In modern terms, Schopenhauer's point reminds us that ethics is not a matter of theory but of empathy. Compassion is not simply an emotion, it is a vision that reshapes how we understand relationships, justice, and even personal responsibility. By placing compassion at the center of moral life, Schopenhauer offers a philosophy that is deeply human, timeless, and urgently relevant to a fractured world. Schopenhauer believed compassion is not just a feeling but a deep metaphysical insight. According to him, when we act compassionately, we momentarily overcome the illusion of separateness that the will imposes on us. Normally, the will drives us to see ourselves as isolated individuals, fighting for survival, pursuing personal gain, and protecting our own interests. This leads to conflict, competition, and even cruelty. But in compassion, something extraordinary happens: we transcend the ego. When I see someone in pain and instinctively want to help, I am no longer acting as a self-contained individual. Instead, I experience the other person's suffering as if it were my own. Schopenhauer described this as a metaphysical recognition that beneath the surface differences, all beings share the same essence, the same will. Thus, compassion is not merely sentimental, it is a kind of awakening. It reveals the truth that we are not divided by rigid boundaries but are expressions of a single underlying reality. This idea connects to Schopenhauer's broader philosophy, where he insists that individuality is an illusion. Just as waves on the ocean may appear separate but are in fact part of the same water, human beings appear distinct but are ultimately one. Compassion allows us to glimpse this unity directly in lived experience, not just through abstract thought. In today's terms, we might compare this to the way neuroscience shows humans are wired for empathy, or how mindfulness traditions stress interconnectedness. But Schopenhauer pushes even deeper. Compassion is not just a useful social tool, it is evidence of a profound metaphysical truth. Whenever we act with kindness, we temporarily escape the tyranny of the ego and move closer to the ultimate reality that unites all existence. Schopenhauer argued that compassion is the only true foundation of morality. He rejected traditional systems of ethics that were built on rules, rewards, or religious commandments. For him, Morality cannot be imposed externally, it must arise naturally from within. And the only genuine moral impulse, he believed, is compassion. Why? Because all other motivations, such as fear of punishment, desire for praise, or pursuit of heaven, are ultimately selfish. They keep us trapped in the ego, acting for our own benefit rather than from concern for others. Compassion, however, is different. It is the rare moment when we act not for ourselves but because we feel the suffering of another as our own. When I help someone in need without expecting anything in return, I am not driven by ego but by genuine moral awareness. Schopenhauer described this as the breaking of the barrier between self and other. In compassion, I stop seeing the world as me versus them. Instead, I intuitively recognize that their pain is part of the same reality I belong to. This is why he saw compassion as the ultimate moral compass. It aligns us with truth, not illusion. This idea also helps explain why Schopenhauer saw cruelty and selfishness as profound moral failures. They are the opposite of compassion, acts rooted in ego, competition, and blindness to our shared nature. To harm another is, in his view, to harm oneself, because beneath appearances we are all connected. Modern moral philosophy and psychology often echo this insight. Altruism, pro-social behavior, and empathy-based ethics all reflect what Schopenhauer identified nearly 2 centuries ago. In a world where morality is often debated in terms of politics, laws, or dogma, his radical claim remains relevant. True morality begins not with commandments or calculations, but with compassion. Schopenhauer saw compassion not only as the foundation of morality but also as the most practical antidote to human suffering. Since life, in his view, is dominated by pain, desire, and struggle, most of what we do is driven by egoistic striving. This striving keeps us locked in conflict, with ourselves, with others, and with the world. Compassion interrupts this cycle. When we act compassionately, we shift from self-centered will to selfless connection. This shift creates harmony where there was competition, and relief where there was tension. In a world filled with endless desires and rivalries, compassion functions like a pause button. It allows us to step outside the restless push of the will, even if only for a moment. This, Schopenhauer believed, is one of the very few ways we can truly reduce suffering. For example, when I choose to forgive instead of retaliate, or when I help instead of exploit, I not only lessen another's pain but also free myself from the poison of anger, envy, and resentment. Compassion benefits both the giver and the receiver. It dissolves hostility and creates bonds of trust. In this sense, it is deeply practical, not abstract. Modern psychology supports this view. Research shows compassion reduces stress, improves relationships, and even boosts physical health. But Schopenhauer's insight goes further. Compassion is not just useful, it is metaphysically significant. It's a sign that we are capable of transcending the illusion of separation and touching the unity beneath life's surface. In today's divided world, where conflict and competition dominate headlines, Schopenhauer's call for compassion feels urgent. He reminds us that compassion is not weakness, nor mere sentiment, it is strength, clarity, and a radical act of truth in a reality otherwise ruled by the blind will. For Schopenhauer, compassion was not just about moral acts, it was a way of piercing through the illusion of individuality. He believed that our sense of being separate, isolated selves is one of the greatest deceptions created by the will. We walk through life thinking, I, and you, mine, and theirs, constantly dividing reality into fragments. But compassion shatters that illusion by letting us directly experience the interconnectedness of existence. When I feel another person's suffering as if it were my own, the rigid boundary between self and other begins to blur. In that moment, individuality no longer feels absolute. Instead, I recognize, at least unconsciously, that the same life force flows through us both. Schopenhauer saw this as evidence that all beings are manifestations of one underlying reality. Compassion, therefore, is not just moral, it is metaphysical. it reveals the truth of unity hidden beneath the surface of separateness. This idea aligns strikingly with spiritual traditions across the world. In Hinduism, the concept of Tat Tvam that expresses the same realization of oneness. In Buddhism, compassion arises from the recognition that all beings are interconnected and impermanent. Schopenhauer, though a Western philosopher, drew deeply from these ideas and gave them a new philosophical grounding. In practical life, this perspective can transform how we relate to others. Instead of seeing strangers, enemies, or competitors, we begin to see mirrors of ourselves. Compassion thus becomes more than an ethical choice. It becomes an act of seeing reality as it truly is. By dissolving the illusion of individuality, compassion offers a rare kind of freedom. It allows us to step outside the prison of ego and glimpse the deeper unity of existence, a unity that, for Schopenhauer, lies at the very core of truth. Schopenhauer ultimately believed that compassion leads us to a higher ethical and even spiritual existence. While most of life is driven by the blind will, desire, striving, and endless dissatisfaction, compassion represents a step toward liberation. It shows that we are capable of more than selfish craving. We are capable of transcending ego and aligning with something deeper. For Schopenhauer, this higher path points toward what he called denial of the will, a way of life where one minimizes personal desire and instead lives in harmony with truth. Compassion plays a central role in this process because it shifts our focus from ourselves to others, loosening the grip of ego. A person who consistently practices compassion, he argued, rises above ordinary morality into a state of peace and wisdom. This does not mean that life becomes free of suffering. Schopenhauer was too realistic for that. Instead, it means we can face suffering differently. Compassion allows us to share burdens, to reduce pain where we can, and to see beyond the constant striving of the will. In this sense, it is both ethical and therapeutic. In a modern world filled with consumerism, competition, and self-promotion, this message is profoundly countercultural. We are taught that fulfillment comes from success, possessions, and achievement. Schopenhauer warns that such pursuits only deepen the cycle of suffering. True elevation, he insists, comes not from grasping more but from giving more. Compassion is the bridge from restless striving to inner peace. Thus, it leaves us, with Schopenhauer's challenge, to live compassionately is to live truthfully, to resist the illusions of ego, and to step closer to freedom from suffering. In compassion, we discover not only morality but also the highest possibility of human life. Schopenhauer's philosophy often feels heavy, focused on suffering and struggle. Yet within that darkness, compassion shines as his greatest gift to humanity. He reminds us that in every act of kindness, we break free from ego and touch the deeper truth that unites all life. Compassion is not weakness, nor simply morality, it is a vision of reality itself. In a world obsessed with self-interest and competition, Schopenhauer's message is revolutionary. To live compassionately is to live with clarity, strength, and meaning. Through compassion, we lessen suffering, and in doing so, discover our truest selves.